So hello, my friends, and thanks for stopping by here. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things I've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks, and essentially it revolves around the question, should we be planning a new country? Should we be thinking about how do we put together, how do we a new country? And it's not just an academic and an abstract kind of idea, because there are many people who are writing in different places and who are raising the possibility or the likelihood that the United States is going to break up and that there are going to be new countries that are going to come out of the back of it. Now, those of you who follow some of the things I talk about don't need to be reminded that Martin Armstrong and his computer, which has been around for 40 years and has never been wrong, says that from 2025 to 2027, there will be a global civil war, which will be followed by the breakup of the United States and the European Union, and that by 2032, there will be 5 or 6 independent countries in North America, where the United States, Mexico, and Canada used to be. So you've got some input and some suggestions, some explicit suggestions from this projective technology, which is highly accurate because it's built around the basic and the cyclical nature of how reality works on our planet. So far, one of the shortcomings, by the way, is that it necessarily does not have anything about exogenous things like aliens showing up, or a solar flare, or any of the kind of wild card things that I've written about and talked a good bit about. And those things are becoming increasingly likely, and should they transpire, in fact, in the terms that we've been watching and what appears to be coming, then what it does, it seems to me, and this is something I might ask Marty about when we go down to his conference, his annual World Economic Conference down in Orlando in November. Ask him about this, because there are these anomalies, these big deals that are in play now that have never been in play before, and so they represent, you don't have any cyclical history from which to build on that would give you any indication of these once in history, these big things that happen that have never happened before. So you've got kind of a steady state, an extrapolatory kind of vector that's going out into the future that is saying that the United States of America is going to come apart in a handful of years. That in and of itself is an extraordinary, wild idea of immense kind of complexity and importance and uncertainty and other kinds of things. If you've spent much time dealing with the way the government and other industries and things work, like I have, you are absolutely amazed at the complexity and the interdependence of this whole extraordinary system that kind of loosely held together by some of the basic kind of ideas and concepts that are baked into the institutions and the processes, the economy and education and so on. And there's kind of a parity at some level with all of these contributing factors inside of the system, because they wouldn't be able to effectively communicate. I mean, if the education system didn't supply what the economic system required, then you'd have this kind of mismatch, right? And the same is the case throughout the whole system. And so it's taken a long time to build this kind of internal consistency in the system. And when you break that all up, primarily, because of whatever, and rapidly, then what you've got is extraordinary second and third order implications that you just never anticipated, because you never saw how these connections all work together in different kind of ways. And so you've got that possibility and that likelihood. I mean, so it's coming downstream and it's becoming explicit in those terms. But then there's a whole lot of analysts and pundits and such who are all, and I'd be surprised if most of them were reading Martin Armstrong, but they are coming to the same conclusion because they're looking across the fabric of society and watching, for instance, how the multiple kind of efforts are in play to kind of drive a wedge into the fundamentals of how we've defined ourselves as individuals and people in a culture and so on, and trying to kind of divide and conquer, if you will, and rather than bring cohesion together and generate the kind of benefits that come from the cohesion. What they're doing it in multiple ways is trying to drive wedges into the system and produce groups of people who feel disenfranchised and will fight other people's and so on. I mean, it's all kind of obvious what's going on, but the reason really is to fragment the whole system. And so this whole thing just ricochets around. It's all over the place. I mean, the military can't even recruit enough people. There aren't enough recruits for the military now. And then there's something like some crazy numbers. 70% of the military age young people in this country could not get into the military because they're too fat or they're on drugs, or I don't know what it is, but they'd never pass the entrance. They're just the basic physical entrance test to get in, to say nothing about I don't know, the product of our schools, and they can't even add and do arithmetic. You've got almost 100% of the students in the school system in Baltimore can't pass the basic arithmetic tests. It's crazy. It's the kind of stuff that's going on. And so you could easily, if you were a relatively objective kind of observer, you could look across all of that and say, where does it all go? Well, it's all coming apart. And you then, drive big things like this war in the Middle East and so on, and the huge amounts of money that are all going offshore, and the war that they're doing against farmers and trying to destroy farms and the conventional way of doing agriculture, and it's just, anyway, it's easy to see once you've got the idea in your mind, it's easy to see the possibility that the present system theoretically could come apart. It's the issue is the complexity and the uncertainty and the unintended consequences and the chaos and everything else that would attend this, and that aggravated, of course, by the efforts, the very significant efforts by the powers that be to maintain control in the face of this degeneration. Marty Armstrong did a half an hour presentation by Zoom to a conference, a convention, a conference in Sweden. He was supposed to be there in person, but got sick and couldn't make it. So he happily they did it on Zoom. So he got a tape. We got a recording of it, and he put it up on his blog today. And it's this marvelous kind of overview of the whole kind of system from his point of view. And he says the whole thing's being driven by the inevitable failure of the financial system, and that there's just he doesn't talk about derivatives, but the whole derivative overhang, which is estimated at more than $2 quadrillion, which is 1,000 trillion dollars, and it's impossible by orders of magnitude to ever cover the obligations that are baked into that kind of those relationships of derivatives. And so there's somewhere out there, and Marty talks about how that the banks are unable to they've got this debt problem, and they're not going to be able to pay anything of what they owe, and they don't intend to do that. And so that can only be sustained for a very short period, or a relatively short period of time. The point, though, is that it's inevitable that you can't get yourself out of that. David Martin came here and gave a transition talk a couple of years ago, and explicitly said that somewhere between 2027 and 2029, the United States financially hits the wall, and the whole financial system comes down. Can't pay any pensions, can't pay Medicare, Medicaid, none of those kinds of things, no Social Security. The bottom falls out of the system, and there is absolutely no way that they can deal with that. So there's lots of different indications coming from many points of view and from many directions that are all converging on the whole idea that the structure, the organization that we have presently, or that we've all grown up with, that are all familiar to us, is not going to sustain itself in the coming years. Now, there's this kind of interesting presumption that many of us in the United States kind of carry around with us, that presumes that the United States is always going to be around the way kind of like it's always been. I mean, there was this inability to consider the fact that almost every other major empire and civilization in the world, in one way or another, has turned over and reorganized itself in one way or another, and that it's entirely possible for that to happen here. The whole situation is aggravated by the internet, which generates in the metabolism that accelerates the metabolism of the whole system, so that you don't have the latency that is the kind of been in the past. And so everything's going faster and faster, and then you layer in artificial intelligence, which then just starts to blow things up in terms of not only the acceleration of the thing, but the ability to disintermediate and extract, pull the threads out of the fabric of the economic system, to say nothing about other aspects of the whole thing. And so there are lots of kind of pretty interesting as well as good reasons that are becoming explicit that are causing people to start to talk about civil wars and talk about, the breakup of the country and other such things. And so the question in my mind is that, do you wait around for that to all happen? Or do we get out in front of that a little bit and start to see, in the famous terms of comment of what's his name? He used to be the chief of staff of the White House, who went on to be the mayor of Chicago. He says, you never let a good crisis go to waste, because what happens is, in a crisis like that, the whole system comes apart. And so all of the givens that are related to the constraints that force consistency and predictability within a system come apart. And so now you have this kind of open season, this ability to reconfigure things in a new way that just would have been impossible before. And these kinds of events happen very, very seldom, or certainly on the scale that what we're contemplating now. This kind of disruption has never happened before, and not only has it never happened before, but we have the perspective and the tools that have never existed before as humans to be able to do something about it. Every other major time of, disruption and change has essentially been a wave that's carried the citizens of this planet into a new space, and they did not know what was going on. They were riding the wave, and they had no idea what was going on nor where it was going. They did not have the capability. They didn't have the reach. They didn't have the history. They didn't have the books. They didn't have the data. They didn't have anything. That's different now. We have kind of this convergence of extraordinary kind of technology that is enabling the unpacking, if you will, of amazing amount of information related to things, even just like science and history. In history, in terms of being able to rapidly kind of find out what we think happened in the past. In terms of science, the understanding about the inner workings of systems, and whether it's social systems or physical systems or other kinds of things, we have a huge advantage in terms of understanding where we are in terms of the evolution of the species. And that's coupled up then with technologies that allow us to do scenarios and alternative pictures and be able to project out onto the horizon possibilities in a systematic kind of a robust kind of way in which we've never been able to do before. And all of that gives us, for the first time in history, the opportunity to begin to visualize and build and design the framework, the structure of a new reality, of a new world, of a new reality. And we've talked about that many times, about that new world and so on. And so it's one thing to talk about a new world and what could happen, and even to kind of bring that down to your own country, like the United States. But many people who have thought about this say what you really need to do is start to think about a community and get this to a kind of a manageable size to start with. Now, that might be the best place to start. Maybe you would start. I mean, we've certainly been thinking about that here in Berkeley Springs, in our West Virginia community, about new ways in which you can do things. But it's more than that. There are lots of people who have tried to do communities of one sort or another, and most of them have failed because they have gotten all mixed up with primarily around social things. Sometimes it's economic, but sometimes it's interpersonal relationships and sex and other kinds of stuff. And so there are very few examples of what a new world would look like, or what a new country or whatever. And so, but we have, for the first time, as I've suggested, the way methodologies and the kind of the history and the capability to kind of systematically walk ourselves across the horizon and try to figure out exactly what we could do. So that makes it fundamentally different. So that means that we don't have to get swept downstream by this extraordinary change, but that we can hack the system, if you will, that we can anticipate, we can figure out what might happen, we can get a lot closer to prediction. We're not going to ever be able to predict this exactly, but we can get a lot closer to it through some of these kinds of capabilities and the technologies. And that then gives you a giant step in the right direction that you can then, if you have open minds and open systems, you can then make it recursive so that you get feedback, and you can integrate the feedback back into the system so that as you move into this new space, that you can do course corrections as you're going and able to come up with new things. So that's new, and we can do that. And so we have the kind of on a large kind of level this these set of tools that can do that. That is also, there's a whole bunch of very interesting theory. Smart people who have started to think about this starting way back in the 70s, for instance. SRI, which became the Sanford Research Institute, did a study back in the 70s. It was headed up by Willis Harman, who later went on to run the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And this study was run by Oliver Markley. And it looked at the changing, what was the name of the changing image of man, I think is what it was. And it was this deep and extraordinary kind of look at the fundamentals of how how human beings were looking at themselves and becoming somebody different, looking at themselves in a different way. It was really a landmark study. It was really quite extraordinary. And then there were guys like Bela Benathi, who was, I think he was he wasn't at Stanford. He was at one of the places up there in the Bay Area, who has done some extraordinary work on the kind of the mechanics of how you think about the emergence of a new world. And this is way back in like the 70s and some in the 80s. And then there have been kind of redos of these things. Back in 2020, there's a very interesting kind of study that was commissioned by some foundation and that looked at this. I have David Gerson, who's a very thoughtful guy about social systems change, has done a bunch of work about in this area. So it's not like that it's just these external forces and things that are causing people to think about this. That is to say, the economic system or the financial system or the workplace or the whatever it turns out to be. All of those things are moving and pushing and giving indications to that they're not going to stay on a straight line going forward. But at the same time, and earlier, you had all these people who were starting to think very structurally and fundamentally, and they were kind of sussing the vibes of the culture and saying this is moving somewhere else, and there's whole new values and things that are coming up around here. And so so this is in the wind. The whole thing is in the wind, and it's hard to believe that as encrusted as a large country becomes over time, that it has the ability to dance and to adjust and to reconfigure itself in the face of all of this stuff, right? And so what is inevitable? The inevitable is that in the face of this big wave of deep cultural and change, that the existing infrastructure implodes and breaks up and a new world emerges, right? So it's inevitable. It's going to come one way or the other, it seems. And the question is, do we get out in front and do we help design this all? Well, as I've suggested, you could start with the community, and you could start with some, small number, 150, 200 people or some other kind of thing, which is kind of the workable number. But this is not an opportunity for thinking small. This is a real interesting kind of opening. Opening in the line in football terms that you really ought to run through, because this could lead to some really interesting and big things coming downstream, not the least of which, of course, is an evolutionary jump for the species. But what we're talking about is what is the framework that supports and encourages such an extraordinary kind of transformation in who we all are as human beings. Well, that then kind of raises your sight to higher onto the horizon, and you start to say, so if you don't want to kind of start at a community level, then what would you do? You want to do a state? Well, that's a interesting number, and there's some cohesion and there's some internal systems that kind of hold it together. But again, right now, the states are all built around the same kind of principles and the ideas and the systems and the assumptions that are driving the larger system, the country. And so you say to yourself, well, if this whole thing comes unglued and unraveled rather rapidly within the next 4 or 5 years, and then you have an opportunity to reconstitute it and rebuild it into something new, then it is really not only an extraordinary opportunity, but a situation the likes of which nobody has ever done before. I mean, now all cool and neat things are things that have never been done before, in one sense. But this is of an order of magnitude more complex and any implications. And this is the kind of thing that you really ought to get it right. If you don't do this one well and do it right, then you risk, affecting a whole lot of people in a very negative way. And so the idea is that saying, wait, if the country's going to come up, if the country as we know it is going to come apart, then maybe we should start thinking about how we kind of would organize ourselves in a big chunk in this in what starts to come out of the back end of this thing. Now that's a big conversation in itself, and rather than belabor this, let me just suggest to you that when you think about that, what certainly surfaces very quickly is the notion that these new countries are going to be organized around a set of ideas that are common to the organizers or the original citizens or the inhabitants of the space, right? I mean, why would you be a part of a country that you didn't, when you could go anywhere and everybody else was kind of building countries all over the place? What you would probably do is gravitate toward the one that was most advantageous or appealing to you, right? And so, and in this kind of, there's going to be a lot of fluidity in this kind of space. And so you're not going to be kind of locked up into, I would suggest, locked up to the geography that we typically think of and commonly feel. You're going to see opportunity wherever it is, and you're going to move and you're going to go because you will know that this is really different and you get a chance to. And by the way, you've just come out of an extraordinary, tumultuous, chaotic kind of breakdown, and you're really going to look for some stability, and you're going to look for that around like-minded people. So there's kind of a process around how you would do this, and you would really want to kind of isolate, distill the basic kind of ideas that this new country might have, so that it had a unique kind of vision. I'm using that in kind of a functional term, but you'd probably want or a conceptual term way, but you'd really want to probably do it in more explicit in a picture of what this new country would be like and how would it operate. And what's most important about the whole thing is to capture and define and describe what the new ideas are that animate this new space. How do you what are your values? What are your assumptions? What are the kind of presumptions that you bring to the table? And again, there's some wonderful studies and work and books that I've collected that talk very specifically about the kind of component parts that you need to address to bring together this kind of integrated kind of new idea that was a set of ideas that could be saleable and workable in this new space. What you'd really want to do is kind of refine this thing down to where and work it such that you could hold it up and your kind of people, because after all, that's what you're trying to do, is to get a cohesive, you get the best kind of group together that are going to work together, and you're not going to have any, we're on our way toward this 1,000 years of peace. Remember, keep that in the back of your mind, that this is a huge kind of change where the way we resolve things and how we think of things and how we interact with other people is really quite different than the present kind of competitive based kind of framework that drives everything from personal relations all the way up through economics and politics and so on. And so there's got to be the assumption, it's built into the basic idea, is that this is really different and it has a bunch of new ideas. And so we got to search for and find those new ideas. I think it's kind of a classic new product launch kind of a project, to where you got to kind of distill this down and figure out what it is and get to the place where you understood relative to the marketplace exactly how this would appeal and what kind of terms you needed. And you'd have to build a logo, if you will, or a theme or an idea or something that you could kind of hang your hat on. You'd want to start to build pictures of how to think of a 30-second commercial that kind of walks you through quickly what this world would be like, or a 2-minute kind of video or something. But anyway, it really, again, I mean, follow me from the beginning. We can do this kind of stuff that you could never do before. And so what you can do is gather up all of these ideas. You can go through the process of integrating them and coming up with something that is a new product, if you will, that could meet a fundamental need. You could turn that into the kind of the marketing and the positioning and the other kind of things that come out of that kind of area of commerce. And you could literally build the basis for a new world. And then, of course, with the internet, you can spread that information, that possibility, and that reality all over the place. So people could say, I like what they're doing over there in West Virginia or wherever it turned out to be, and I'm going to go over there and be a part of that. And you could design the mechanism by which you could quickly come and become a citizen and other kind of things. I mean, it's really pretty wild and crazy and profound and kind of fundamental. It's really interesting to think about something as like building a new country. But anyway, that's it may well be time that we start to do that. The sooner, this is not this is not an incidental kind of something that you do on weekends. This is a serious piece of work, and the sooner you get around to it, the better. And so it might be a good time to start thinking about how we build a new country, or a new certainly to start with, because that would potentially be the initial kind of framework that would lend itself to this kind of thinking.